working class men, they don't have privilege. They are convinced that they have to protect their power in relationship to us. But that's stupid. You know, that's one of the things that I learned in the Wages for Housework campaign.
Welcome back to another episode of What Do We Do Next? I am thrilled for our next guest today. Beth Green has spent over 4 decades challenging systems of injustice and offering grounded support to those on the front lines of change. Tracked by the FBI at age 12, arrested 3 times for protesting, and expelled from Smith College without a hearing for her anti-nuclear activism, Beth's political journey is as bold as it is enduring. Getting tracked by the FBI at 12, I gotta say, that gives you some serious street cred, Beth.
Right, and
sure.
That's a lot more than 45 years.
Yeah,
I'm 80 years old.
Oh my goodness. Amen. 7 decades. So Beth also served as West Coast coordinator for the Wages of Housework campaign in the 1970s, advocating for the economic recognition of women's labor. She's been a regular contributor to the San Diego News Network and the Huffington Post, hosted live stream commentaries, and developed frameworks for resistance and political clarity during times of crisis. Living with chronic illness since the age of 15, Beth is a fierce advocate not just for action, but for sustainability in activism. Her work now focuses on helping people stay emotionally centered, intellectually alert, and strategically useful in an age of fear, disinformation, and social collapse. She is the author of 6 books, a composer of 6 original music albums, and a former segment producer for NBC's Saturday Show in Los Angeles. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Beth.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, Molly.
Well, I'm so happy to be here with you. You have become one of my favorite. You and Dr. Margaret, who you haven't met yet, you were my 2 favorite people to talk to. So.
Oh, great. Yeah. Well, I love talking to you too. So I love the fact that I'm coming in early on your podcast so I can support your podcast, and I feel very supported by you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. You know, that's very nice of you, Beth. People don't know this, but you have your own podcast. And you get into some really heavy stuff, and I really appreciate the content that you cover and the experience that you bring to the table. You shared some stories with me the other day that I'll talk about, but you know, one of your key phrases was spiritual activism, and I just love that. And so let's get into that a little bit. What does spiritual activism mean to you?
Well, I was an activist really since I was 5, if you want to be very specific, which is a mere 75 years ago. I started talking about people's consciousness, and I don't know where it came from, but there it was. And then when I was 9, I became what I call socialist, which was about sharing equally income, not being run by an oligarchy and so on. And I went through the left. I was in the anti-war movement. I was in all of them, and worked full time for the movement. Actually, made a living working as a secretary and a clerical worker for many organizations. So I started my own group, and I want to tell you that in the end, I was so burnt out, and I was burnt out. Not because of all the brutality that I experienced also. I mean, we used to walk down the street and the cops in New York would leap down from the walls with the batons and start splitting heads. And I've been beaten on the street too by the police. So this is not anything new. It's just a lot more widespread than it was before. But I wasn't burnt out because of that. I was burnt out because of the anger in the movement. And I really understand being angry because during the Vietnam War, I just cried every day. I just couldn't stand the idea that my government was doing these terrible things. And it made me angry. And what was happening to Black people in the country and farm workers, it all made me angry. But it was the fighting within the movement. It was disagreeing, and putting this one down, and the competition and the male chauvinism. I want to tell you, I was the only one who had read Marx, and I was expected to make the coffee and not say anything, because women had nothing to say in those days, right? And it was all of that really was making me sick, and some terrible things happened to me in the end, and I said, I'm out of here. I'm out of here. There had to be something else that could be done. And I suddenly, out of the complete blue, had a spiritual awakening. I mean, I started hearing voices that were telling me what to do. And for instance, I wrote books on topics I didn't know anything about. And I did audio tapes on topics. I didn't even know what the topic was until I said, and today I'm going to talk about, and something came out of my mouth because I was very tuned in. So it was a very spiritual time for me. And I was working with people and I wanted to clear up what was going on within people. I was very, very interested and still am in our conditioning and the stupid things we do because of our conditioning that we don't even realize we're doing, and how trapped most of us are by these conditions. And so I spent a lot of years working on that, built up a spiritual organization, did all that kind of stuff. But in the end, there was still poverty. There was still suffering. And I had to come back to activism. But I wanted to do it from a different perspective. I wanted to be well myself, and I wanted to understand why people did what they did. I didn't want to compete with other, activists. I didn't want to become a star in the movement. I didn't want any of those things. I wanted to really help. And, it's still there. What blocks people, what causes people to do the things that they do and not just be angry. So it's based on my book, Living with Reality, 9 platforms for becoming ourselves, which I've changed the name to who we are, what we could be, and how we get there. And that name came to me in the middle of the night. You're going to write this book. And I said, okay, what is it? And it took me 9 years to write that book. Every other book I wrote like in 2 weeks because it all just came through me. But this one, I had to do it step by step. I had to think everything through. I had to experiment in workshops to see if these techniques and tools worked. And it was all about shifting ourselves and how do we shift consciousness and where does it come from? And 3 of those platforms are oneness, accountability, and mutual support. And those 3 are the heart of spiritual activism. We need to feel at one with the universe and with everyone and try to see the interconnection and get over this individualistic, egotistical bullshit that we're all into. And I studied the ego a lot. Accountability means, hey, we're responsible for the impact of what we do. And the last one is mutual support. It's like, no, it's not about interdependence. It's about mutual support. I support you, you support me, just like we're doing here right now. And those are the basic tenets of spiritual activism. And I want to bring that in everything I do.
So you've been on the front lines. The other day you told me how you were arrested and physically assaulted for handing out a pamphlet for people to know how to access benefits. And, can you tell us that story? Because I think it's relevant to everything we're talking about now.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I was arrested 3 times, but this time was a little bit special because I worked with welfare women when I was doing the Wages for Housework campaign, talking about why are women weaker in society and what is happening to us and how does that impact the whole society. So I worked with some women who were on welfare. They weren't welfare women. They were women on welfare. And I myself was on, SSI because I was completely disabled at that time. And I asked them, because they were the experts on welfare, what were the rights? And we did this newspaper called the Welfare Penny Press. And in it, it just put out, these are your rights in the welfare system. I didn't know what they were. They knew. And we took them down to the welfare office, one of the welfare offices in LA. And the police came to get us out of there. And they told us to leave. And I said, why do I have to leave? I'm handing out information to people who are going to apply for welfare. Oh, I mean, I had experiences with welfare, which is like horrifying, actually. And so they arrested me, and they handcuffed me. And they started dragging me around the welfare office, and everybody was screaming, she's disabled, because I was. And, being dragged around by handcuffs is a very unpleasant experience, even when the handcuffs are in front of you. They hurt, especially when you're really disabled like I am. So after that, I was charged with assaulting an officer. I was charged with assaulting an officer. Are we not seeing that today? Right?
Well,
And
yeah.
And so I got a lawyer from the movement. Thank God we had movement lawyers then too. And this guy said, you have so many witnesses there. It's a slam dunk. But now they're offering, if you drop your charges against them, they'll drop their charges against you. In other words, I had to and that's what they advised me to do. But the reason that they claimed that I assaulted an officer was to have leverage over me. And I had the same thing in another arrest. I was accused of intimidating an officer, two officers. There were two sheriffs. I'm 5 foot. They were over 6 foot each. Each one of them must have weighed 250 pounds, right? And they stood before the judge and they said that I intimidated. And the judge looked at them and the case was dismissed. So even though I didn't have a lawyer, they refused me a lawyer. The government refused to give me a lawyer, which I was entitled to. They said I was in graduate school, and if I hadn't been in graduate school, I could have afforded a lawyer. And on that basis, they wouldn't give me one. No, I mean, it's crazy. This stuff that's going on today is it's so much more widespread. More people are seeing it, but there were awful things that were going on for decades. It's always been like that. Then it kind of got quiet. But now it's back up and people are waking up, and I am ecstatic that people are waking up.
Well, and the reason why I asked you that, to tell that story again, is because it's so relevant to right now. There you were just giving information to people for people to access the rights that they've right. worked for, that they should be afforded. More importantly, they've worked for, right? It's everything right now. Social Security. We all bought into that system. It's not right. a grift. It's not a Ponzi scheme. We paid into it our whole lives. And this is nothing new. And I think a lot of people, maybe my generation, maybe generations younger, who haven't really seen that kind of resistance. Yeah. I mean, little flare-ups, don't get me wrong. Yeah. George Floyd. Yeah. Right. But I don't think anything like what we're seeing, where it's going to require mass resistance of lots of people, like the No Kings protest, and it's really going to take a mass mobilization. And I can definitely understand. I certainly was not an activist, but I was involved in a lot of things in DC and always trying to do stuff. And I also I wore myself all the way out. I was putting everybody else in front of myself. And then yes. I just lost my efficacy, and I just really became bitter, and then I couldn't do anything else. And so I tried to find that balance. And it wasn't the same issues, right? Because, times have changed. So it wasn't that I was belittled as a woman. It was just overwhelming. It feels like you're fighting against this machine. And at least now there's some other people next to you. But how do people manage that in this time, especially now with, the overwhelming news cycle that's just being pummeled at you all day long with equally terribly terrifying news, every single one of them? How do we manage that?
That's a really important question you're asking. And I want to start with the first part is we have to realize that we are in this for the long haul. It's not enough to get outraged every day. One day, I was in the movement for decades, and I was outraged every day. There were so many things there. And what happens is you become filled with anger.
Yeah.
And you said it perfectly. You said you became bitter. I felt so alienated from other Americans because I was fighting a system, and it was more than that. And maybe we'll have time, I don't know if we will, to get into how the system creates all of this, the economic system, the social system. But we're in it for the long haul. This isn't going to go away overnight. And we're already seeing this. I'd like to wake up tomorrow and see that this whole thing is a nightmare that isn't happening. But it is happening, and it's not going to end. The likelihood is it's going to go on for a while. Okay, so how do we stay well? And filling ourselves up with negative energy is not brave. It's stupid. And of course we're going to be outraged. Of course we're going to be disgusted. When you see abuse, your stomach is going to turn over, and it should. Everybody's stomach should be turning over. But you can't live in that energy. It's like living in the cesspool. You can't be strong and healthy if you're eating garbage and drinking toxins. In order to be strong and healthy, you have to take care of yourself. You have to be, so it's not about a balance, although of course, in a way it is. It's really about recognizing we have an obligation to be well. If we really want to do something about this world, we have to be centered. We have to be courageous. We have to be compassionate. We have to be clear. We have to be conscious. And we can't do that if we're in a state of hysteria. We can't be, oh no, did you see what happened? He did this, he did that. And, people just, like last week, somebody said, oh, I'm freaking out about Iran. I'm thinking, you're freaking out about Iran? Don't freak out, please. Please don't freak out. And so that is extremely important, is to realize that we have to be well in order to sustain not only resistance, but more important than that, transformation. Our society needs to be transformed, or otherwise it's going to happen again and again and again. There's always some reason for people to hate each other, be horrible to each other, oppress somebody, and so on. And so that's extremely important. And so how do we be well? Well, we have to nurture ourselves. And we have to know what nurtures us. And a lot of people think that going and having a drink, going to a party, is how you're going to relax. And I don't know if I'm offending you or not, but I can tell you that is not the way, because all that does is deplete your spirit, your energy, makes you more sick. You are escaping, but not really regenerating. And we have to see the difference between escape and regeneration. Now, I don't mean that you don't want to escape occasionally, like listen to some music, but that listening to the music isn't to escape, it's to regenerate. It's like to be well, to make yourself well again so that you can be clear. Otherwise, we're just hysterical and, we're pretty stupid. So we have to keep doing that. And then we have to look at what we really can offer. What can we do? I am not physically well, but I have a mouth, and nothing is going to stop me from talking. I don't care. I'm not afraid. Or I can't even say that I'm not afraid. It's like the fear. I may have fear, but it doesn't impact me. It's like out there. I remember the most frightened time that I ever had was I was hiding somebody in my apartment that the FBI was looking for. And I knew that they did things like shoot through your door. Mm-hmm. And I was really scared that they were going to come and shoot through my door. But it didn't stop me. It didn't stop me. Because I did the things that I needed to do. Now, this is in the old days when I didn't have the wisdom that I have now about how to take care of myself. I wasn't a spiritual activist. I was just an activist. But I wasn't going to let it stop me. So, guys, if you feel fear or you feel outrage, have compassion for yourself. Who wouldn't? But then you say, but I'm not going to let that dominate me, because there are other things that are more important to me than my fear. And it's my love and my compassion and my concern about the fate of other people. I won't be here that much longer, but you will. And the young people will, and they're inheriting an increasingly polluted environment. It's, this has been going on for how long? This didn't start with Donald Trump. And so these are the kinds of things, and always be guided by the future. And what I mean by that is, this is how it comes to me. Because see, when I became intuitively guided, I just started hearing things that were much smarter than I was. And I listened to them. And that's how I'm a counselor, and I work intuitively. I just hear things and I trust it after all these years. So that's the 45 years. And what I heard was, be informed by the past, live in the present, and be guided by the future. Never be guided by the past.
Love that.
Don't you love that? But being informed, but don't be guided. Be guided by the future. What is your heart telling you? Where do we need to go? Where are we going? What is going to help really heal this planet? And let's move towards that.
Wonderfully said. I want to talk about, and this is probably a taboo topic, I'm sure not for you, but our role as white women in this movement and our privilege and how we need to show up in this time. It feels even more important while they're rounding up brown people from every Latin American country. Not saying that they won't smack your hand too if you speak up like I did, but at the end of the day, I'm in my house right now. I didn't lose anything but a convenience afforded to me. How these systems have gotten us here, right? So how do we navigate those? How do you know what to do next? And how do you use your privilege in these times?
Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to disagree with you.
Okay, go for it.
All right. It's not privilege. It's the rights we should all have. It isn't that we should give up what we need. Everybody should have what they need. See, a lot of people will freak out because they think, oh, yeah, the homeless people are going to take over my house. Well, I don't want homeless people taking care over my house either. But does that mean I'm not going to fight for the rights of homeless people? They need a home. And so it's that's part of our brainwashing, Molly. See, we have been brainwashed to think that there are these hierarchies, and what we want to do is climb the ladder, right? And then, and then we have to step on people beneath us, but we're going to climb that ladder. I want to burn the ladder down. You have no privileges as a white woman. You're still a woman. I would bet you anything that you've been abused as a woman. I can't believe that you haven't. I have. I've been raped at knife point twice, tied up with electrical wire. And I was another attempted rape. I was raped by my ex-husband. That's another one. I'm not even talking about that. I was treated like garbage by the police. By the police after I had been raped. I have been oppressed by men my whole life. What privilege? We need a voice, but so are the men. Working class men, they don't have privilege. They are convinced that they have to protect their power in relationship to us. But that's stupid. That's one of the things that I learned in the Wages for Housework campaign, that men are kept down by women's weakness. And men think it's the opposite. This is how we are brainwashed. Why do I say that? If you are the sole earner or you're supposed to be the most, make the most money, and you're both struggling and you can't make it, are you going to go on strike? Are you going to fight the company, or are you going to try to protect your money and your life? You see, it's the weakness of men is the weakness of women. I just want to take a little, detour here. But it's extremely important, I think, which is the role of women in the world, generally speaking, and not just in our own country, is to reproduce the working class. Because now when you talked about welfare mothers are mostly women. They're raising children to go to work. They're working. It's a job. It's an unpaid job. So one of the things that I laughed about, and see, I got a lot from Selma James. There's other things I don't want to tell you about that were not so good, but I did learn from her that, of course, unpaid labor of women, men in the day had to make a salary that was going to pay for the women, the children, and themselves, and they had to work their asses off to do that. And in exchange, they got to come home, have a beer, and put their feet up. But they were besting their asses in the auto factories where they were losing their hands and their fingers and their arms, and in the steel plants, and they were getting black lung disease. Boy, they were so privileged, weren't they? And so when women are able to earn money, which women did before, they started this go back to after World War II, women were sent back to be housewives. But, women weren't always like privileged, sitting around. No, women were working in factories at the turn of the century. Women were working everywhere and taking care of the children and taking care of the men. So I really got it. The man would go to work, be wrecked, go out with his friends, have some beer, get drunk, come back, expect to be served. And that was his big privilege. And the woman was expected to put him back together again, to wash his underwear, to raise the children that are going to go out and work in the factories or the offices or become the CEOs. And that was women's work. Now that work is the work of nurturance. We're supposed to nurture everybody, right? That work has no value in this capitalist society. No value. It was not paid for. It's like, and when you think about that, you think about how we shit on the earth, that we don't nurture the earth, that we don't give the earth a chance to regenerate. That's housework. That is the work of regeneration, and we give it. The latest thing is Trump is proposing to end the ban on asbestos, so people can go out and have all the kinds of diseases. So now think about that. We don't realize that we're supposed to nurture ourselves. That's a job. That's work. That we need to nurture one another. And that it isn't just on women, but because women have very little power in the society, everything associated with women is underpaid. Nursing, teaching, childcare, all of those things. Women didn't have power because we didn't have money. So without money in this world, you don't have power. And so those jobs were underpaid. And the job of the welfare mother was considered to be leeching off the system, and we don't even realize that we have to reinvest in our bridges, in our waterways, in our streams, in our rivers, in our fish and our animals, that everything needs to be nurtured. So if you look at it that way, and we didn't talk about this in the Wages for Housework campaign when I was there in the 70s, but this is what I see. That it is the crisis of not valuing the work of regeneration and raising the next generation of children, helping people, that work is not being done because everything is geared towards making profit. So my thought about the world is that the purpose of society is to meet the needs of people and the earth. And that is the purpose of the economy. Now, if you look at it from that perspective, this whole world is upside down.
100%. I mean, at this point, like the nurturing mentality or vibe is looked down upon by the Republicans. They think it's, leeching or this or that, or, accepting people. Like, it's just so convoluted, right? But that's exactly what it is. If we care about each other more, then we wouldn't be able to watch babies being ripped from their mother's arms. And I think that we are seeing that now. I think we are seeing like a resistance, a rebellion. People are saying that, this is not it. And I want to talk to you a little bit about, speaking of nurture.
Thing from what you said. Yes, seeing historically the role of immigrants in this country is to be cheap labor, that
Right.
it was like slavery. We built the industrial North through the slave trade. You know what I mean? And through the sale, so much of our wealth has been built on unpaid labor, women's labor, and cheap labor. And so the stupidity of all of this
Right.
is that we're treating people like they have no value, and yet what their contribution is essential, and they're beginning to look at that. And the one more thing I want to say before we get back to your point is, like, your privilege, you think of it more in terms of your power. Your power is your inner self. Your power is your courage and your integrity. Your power is that you're not going to get picked up today by ICE, but tomorrow you might be. And you use your power for the good. You don't throw your power away.
Mm.
And you don't undermine your power. Sorry. Anyway,
That's okay.
Please go on with.
That's okay. Well, let's talk about how do we implement that into today? How do people who are... That's not what I want to ask you. What I want to ask you is, what do we do next? Where do we go from here? Because to me, I don't think any of this is sustainable, right? And I don't think anybody wants things to go back to the way they were. And if things continue for the next 10 years with inflation and everything the way they have the last 10 years, we're all going to starve to death. My friend Adoria Doucette used to say, if they could figure out how to charge us for air, we'd all be like, let me borrow $1. Let me borrow $1, because we'll all be suffocating. And it feels like we're really getting to that point, right? Like, it's just too much. Nobody wants to go back. It feels like everything needs to be broken. But how do we rebuild it? How do we rebuild it in a new way so that we don't have this exact same thing happen again? Because it's very clear to me that this has been going on for a long time. This has been going on since you've been protesting, since you were 12 years old and everything else. This is nothing new. It's just a different packaging, except we've really dumbed ourselves down, because it's exactly like you said. You take away all the immigrants that make America great, straight up, but we're all immigrants unless you're Native American. So that's a whole other conversation, right? But, how do we rebuild this thing in a way that shows those value to those people? Because I think a lot of Americans are waking up right now. I mean, there's always going to be that percentage of just horrible people, but I think a lot of people are in the midst of watching these beloved Latino community members get round up. They're also, I think, realizing how important those Latino community members are to them and to their family and their community, and maybe even more so than before. It's like, well, wait a minute. These people are doing all of the work to make every single thing possible. So how do we rebuild in a new way that is nurturing, that tries to address all of these things? Because I do believe this younger the Zoomers, they call them the Generation Z. I'm seeing really great content from some of these, young men who are really trying to challenge the status quo. No, guys weren't talking like that when I was in my 20s. So I'm hopeful, but how do we rebuild in this new way?
I love that question. And so I'm going to have to give a little bit of a lecture, in order to explain my answer. Capitalism is a particular way of organizing the economy. It isn't the beginning, the end, the middle, and the future. It's just what we've done. And I would say that it has been very successful to a degree in building wealth, but not in helping people.
Right.
Now, you look at the way the capitalist system works, and I want to just take a moment to tell you how Marx defined communism. From each according to his ability or hers, to each according to her needs. Of course, he didn't say her. From each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. I call that the potluck revolution. You go to a potluck, you bring what you can, you take what you need. That's how society should be. But it isn't like that. And why isn't it like that? Because our society is not built on the foundation of providing for the needs of people on the earth. It's all about capital. It's all about profit. Okay, so now this is how that works. And this is, maybe very simple minded, but let me just start with this. You start out where you're working for yourself, and let's say you're bartering, you're bartering your shoes for a pig, and everything is equal. You know approximately what your shoes are worth. They know what their pig is worth, and nobody's cheated. It's all like trade, right? Now, when you start to go to work for somebody, they are going to sell your product, your shoes, for a profit. That means you aren't getting the value anymore of what you created. Because if you got the value of what you created, the owner wouldn't have any profit. He's not going to run a company for no profit. They want to make money off your labor. So, and Marx really explains this beautifully in terms of the value of labor power, which I'm not going to do all of that. So, by the way, I am not a Soviet communist. I am not any of those things. So that's all stupid. But anyway, it's just a way of separating us so that we don't see the obvious. So the obvious is that we live in a society where the only reason people hire other people is so that they can make money off their labor. And what do they pay you? The minimum that you need in order to survive. And what you're talking about look like with AI. They're going to try to eliminate us altogether, and then they won't have to pay us anything. Then we might as well all die. But who's going to buy the products? Henry Ford figured this out a long time ago, fascist that he was, that if you don't have workers who make enough money, they're not going to buy the cars. And so they realize that you got to have enough money to sustain yourself and enough money to buy the cars. Now, I want to say something that maybe most of you don't know, which is there is slavery in the West Indies and slavery in the United States, black slavery, were a little bit different because when you were having those early plantations, there were slaves being brought in all the time. And you'll see the relevance of this. So it was the slave trade. So if you could buy a slave for less than it would cost you to maintain that slave, you worked it to death and bought another one. That's the way it worked. I studied Latin American history. Now, then in the United States, kind of coming to the end of the slave trade, you had to keep your slaves alive. You couldn't reproduce them by just picking another one off the boat. And so they had to be a little bit more careful with their slaves than they were in the West Indies. Look at that template. That is how ruthless capitalism is how ruthless it is. That
really
it's like,
is.
so it's the same thing. It's like, oh yeah, well, if they can get rid of us, but you still need somebody to buy the products. So the free trade is saying, oh yeah, people need to make money or they won't be able to buy our product. Yeah, but we want to make more profit. And what's happened, of course, is over the decades, the income inequality has gotten worse and worse because money begets money. It's like stocks and bonds and all this stuff. I don't even understand. I refuse to read anything about crypto. I don't want to know about it. I don't need to know about it. That's one thing I don't need to know. Okay, so what we know is that the wealthy are always trying to accumulate profit. And that's because it gives them two things. First of all, it's their ethic. They really believe that gives them value. How much money they make, it's unbelievable, but people think actually that gives them value. But it's also about having power, the power to buy anything they want, to buy anybody they want, the power now we can see to run the country, to buy elections, so they want the power, and that comes from more and more income inequality. And I'm not making that up. Everybody knows this, that it's the workers are more productive. And so what's the difference is that we're getting less of what we produce every year and every decade. They're getting more of what we produce every year and every decade. They're accumulating the power against us, and we're barely surviving. And why do I say we're barely surviving? I don't care how many cell phones you have. You're not eating healthy food. You're not breathing healthy air. you're not living in a healthy emotional society. You're not learning how to care for one another. We spend all this money on healthcare and people are unhealthy. We're not making it. People are dying younger. So we can see the deterioration. Back in the day, they started public health because the working class was literally shrinking in size because they were working in such terrible conditions that they were shrinking, and they couldn't sustain a system where workers couldn't even reproduce themselves, which is, as I tie that into the women thing. So this is what the system is. Now, how do you change that? Well, you start by blowing the whole thing up, by saying, this is not what we want. We want a society that cares for the needs of people and the earth. What other purpose could there possibly be for a society?
Do you think that's possible? Like, I try to imagine, like, how does that work? How does it, like, people got to pay their rent. People got to have, how does that work in this
Well,
new?
it doesn't mean there's no money. It just means that it's that we're not in a profit-driven society, that we're in a society that's trying to meet needs. The healthcare system should be making us healthy, not creating profits, right? Everything should be to give us benefits. We should have clothing that is healthy, that doesn't have all kinds of chemicals in it, that isn't made by some slave laborer in Bangladesh who's got pollution and is dying from that pollution in order to put those clothes, because we're a world. So we need clothes that are healthy. We need cottons. We need healthy fabrics. We need not to be buying shit that we have to throw away in 10 minutes. So, I mean, in the simplest sense, now you take other countries, like in Germany, every big corporation, 50% of their board of directors is made up of workers. Do we have that here?
Wow.
You see, we are so brainwashed. We think that the way we live is the only way. Right. You look at the democratic socialist countries, and you see the amount of social welfare, and I don't mean welfare like, oh, you're poor, so here's, but caring for the society, for how they treat criminals instead of mass incarceration to scare people to death, how you treat children in school, what you're teaching children. How about teaching children cooperation? I started a program once called Unleashing the Power of Kids, and it had several parts, but one of them was that kids need service. They need to feel valuable. Every kid needs to feel valuable. The kids loved it. And we had non-competitive games and exercise. And then we would teach in critical thinking. Teach children, teach ourselves to care for one another. It's not impossible. See, if you live in a system that constantly shows you on television and in social media and everything else that power is all that counts, you're going to believe that. You're going to believe. I worked for corporations. I saw those executives. What a mess. They were not well. There's nobody in this society who is really all that well. We're all stressed. They were afraid they were going to get fired. I couldn't believe it. Vice presidents, I'm not going to mention the corporation, giant corporation. 32 vice presidents were fired on the same day. They were all so afraid. They were all afraid of the owner. And, I suggested, I was working there, and I suggested that we do a newsletter. And they said, oh, no, the president of the company does not like newsletters. And they waited a year. And finally, I said, why don't you let me do the newsletter and show it to him? They let me do the newsletter. They tentatively showed it to, I'm talking about a big vice president of this. God knows how much money he made. He finally showed us the guy. He said, oh, I love it. We should have more of those. But they were living in fear. They're living in fear. It's not about I'm against owners or I'm against anybody. We have a very sick society. So we have to first acknowledge it, that we're not well, that our value system is upside down, and that we're all competing with each other for crumbs. And that's the basis, of course, if we know of the prejudice against women, racism, misogyny, all of it is, oh, if you have something, I'm not going to have it. No, there is more. We just need to start giving people what they need. And it doesn't mean that I have to make as much money as you do. I need what I need. You need what you need. We all need to have, how does a potluck work? People just automatically know how to do this. There are so many things that we can do. Single payer health care that covers dentists. I mean, oh yeah, it's okay if I go to the hospital, but I can't get glasses, have my teeth fixed or anything like that. It's so stupid. I don't want Medicare. I want something that actually takes care of my health. How about food, healthy food, paying for healthy food and so on? It's just like, it's easy. It's that we can't believe it because we're told it can't be done. We're told that you have to be cutthroat, dog eat dog. You know what I mean? You look at children playing, and sometimes they fight. But how many times have you seen a child show compassion for somebody, go over to them when they're crying and touch them, right? I'm sure you felt compassion when you were a child. We have all the good things beaten out of us because we live in a society where we think we have to kill each other to survive, and that we have to rape our earth. And yet they're beginning to discover that the more time you spend in nature, the healthier you are.
Well, I'm hoping. Oh, sorry,
yeah.
Go ahead.
So that's why I wrote the new Declaration of Independence.
I was just going to ask you about that. Tell us about the new Declaration of Independence.
Well, this was a couple of months ago. All of a sudden, out of the blue, I got this message and that said, you need to write a new Declaration of Independence. And so I read the Declaration and I said, well, what's in it? I can't remember, And I looked at it and it's very, very cool. And it talks about how we're entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. My God, does that mean that we need to take care of the needs of people on the earth? And it says that if we are facing tyranny and that's damaging to us, then we have a right to remove that government. Get rid of the kings, right? And replace it with something that works. Now, people are not quite there generally yet to say, well, we really need to replace the whole economic and political system. Obviously, we have to get rid of the money in politics. That's obvious. We cannot allow people to buy our politicians. And we need to develop more co-ops, and we need to teach people to care. And that, because we do have also that other side of us that is all about me, that's the ego, that's all other. I could talk for 3 hours about the ego, but it's all connected. It's all about me, it's for me. And if it's not about me, it's about my family. Then you go from my town, my race, my people, my country, and everybody else, the hell with them. But it's not like that, because we are one, we are interconnected. And, there was an aphorism that came to me, which was, you cannot clean the air over one house in Los Angeles. This was during those terrible times with the terrible pollution. And, you could be as rich as anybody and your air is polluted because you live in the same city as other people. And I remember when I lived in Cleveland, the river burned. So it was so polluted. So we can really rethink things. What do we really need? What do we want? How can we get there? So the new Declaration of Independence says we have a right to get rid of this government, and it goes into some detail, and we have a right to institute something that takes care of people on the earth. And I talk about cooperatives, and I talk about healthcare. These are not far-fetched ideas. It's just that we have been so brainwashed into thinking that anything that is for the collective good is dangerous, is communist, and needs to be eliminated, even though it's what everybody needs.
And what everybody wants, even if they're not able to express that themselves. But I think at the end of the day, like, all of us want the same thing, just to have a good life and to have our needs met and to feel loved and supported and left alone.
Exactly. Exactly. You have really put your finger on it. We're brought up to be competitive. You go to school and the first thing you're doing is you're competing for grades. You're
Boys versus
competing
girls.
everything. It's yeah, exactly. You got to get a scholarship. So you have to then everything is about competition instead of having people work together to solve our problems. And we have to trust each other, and we have to stop hurting one another. We have to stop feeling guilty and start feeling that we all are entitled to get our needs met. And how do we do that? And so the new Declaration of Independence is a petition, and you can sign it. You look at it, see if you agree with it. If you agree with it, sign it and pass it on. When I say guided by the future, I mean we need to be thinking exactly about what is it that we want. It's not enough to resist Trump. It's what do we build? What are we substituting for it? There was a time, when the labor movement really was standing up for the rights of working people. Now, I say everybody is working, really. Everybody is working. We're all part of a system that uses us. I learned something about being disabled and sick. It's like, don't be disabled and don't get sick because you're going to starve.
Yeah.
I lived on those kind of, piddling amounts of money. It's like I had to go to work, even though it was agonizing. And so even those of us who were disabled were like a club against everybody else. Don't get sick, work until you drop. And some people did. I saw it at the phone company. Women dropped dead at their stations because they couldn't take time off to go to the doctor. It was very limited. And they were working for such low wages. They didn't have anything to keep us going. So the first thing is like, to get it, we don't have to do this. We don't have to live this way. Just what you said, we want to feel loved. We want to feel connected. That's what makes people happy, is feeling connected, feeling a part of, and feeling like you have something of your own to contribute. And going back to what do we do and how do we survive this time? Ask yourself what your gifts are. What are you good at? Are you good at talking to elderly people in nursing homes? Then go talk to elderly people in nursing homes. Or you're good with children, or you are good with speech writing, or you're good with organizing people, or are you good with writing? Whatever you are good with, don't blame yourself for not being good with everything. Look at what you are good at, what you can do. Maybe you're not physically able to do something. What can you do? And do it and overcome whatever self-doubt and fear is getting in the way of you doing that. Maybe you were never valued as a child for what your gifts were. Maybe you come into the world thinking that your gifts have no value and you don't even realize it. But maybe they do. And that's what you need to overcome, that conditioning. It's not just our society that conditions us, our families conditioned us. And they have been traumatized too. It's like one generation of trauma after another, hurting the next generation and raising them with self-doubt, self-hatred, and competitiveness. It makes me sick when I see young kids going out and bashing their heads together, trying to beat each other out in sports, getting concussions. Why? Why do we need that? That's not fun. That's not play. Play is healthy. Competition isn't. It's okay if you want to say, oh, how am I doing? But when the purpose of everything is to win, we all lose.
Amen. Well, I think a lot of people are seeing that right now. I hope it's an opportunity for for everything to break down so we can fix it. Dr. Margaret said to me one time, I have to introduce it to you because you guys will get along, but she said, you can't clean the kitchen if you don't see the dirt. And, I thought that was very, very accurate. And she
Exactly.
said, and now we see the dirt,
We do. We do. That's been going on for decades, if not for
right.
centuries, of polluting our world and our spirits and our souls. And I want to say that I'm very proud of Americans. When during the anti-war movement and all, I wasn't proud of Americans. It just made me sick how the stuff that we let be done in our name. But today I'm proud of Americans. I can't believe how people are coming out of the woodwork and they're standing up despite all this effort to intimidate. And now let's take that courage and fight for something better.
Hell yeah. I'm with that. We gotta, every brick in the wall, every bit of foundation, every, unified movement, it makes a difference. Reminds people that we have to take our power back, and we can do it peacefully and musically and with love and
Yes.
glitter. And I don't know if you've heard, but they're glitter bombing ICE agents now because they can't get the glitter off. And I'm like, that is so freaking amazing. I
Creative.
can't even handle it.
So creative. There it is. Look at how creative people really are and
Exactly.
can be when so that's, you see, that gives me hope. People are kind of come up with all kinds of ideas. We just have to change the ethic, the principle. Once we get that the purpose of the economy is to take care of our needs and the needs of the earth, it's like, well, how are we going to do it? Well, ask that million people. Ask the people who are working for these companies. Allow people to go out and create small businesses that are doing that, who are being creative, who are helping. Get that spirit, that love, that creativity, that hope, and that optimism, and people will do it. We can see it. I love that you told me that. I did not know
It's
that.
so cute. I love it. You'd be like, I just imagine them at home all mad trying to get the glitter off. And I'm like, it's just funny and amazing for so many different reasons. So,
It is.
well, Beth, thank you for your time today. I'm sure that people have found this, uplifting and informative and important. And I hope people take away some gems from this on how to take care of themselves and how to sustain this battle. And what you said is true. We're in it for the long haul. And I think, I said this a few weeks ago, but like fascism isn't a pandemic. And I think that in the pandemic, we were all told like everybody's going to die. And then, we just had all this fear, but then, it just sort of went away and you could kind of ride it out a little bit. Not everybody, lots of people suffered from the pandemic, no disrespect to any of that. But a lot of people had a lot of fear and then nothing really actualized from that. And so they've become complacent. And then you combine that with all the isolation that we've had since the pandemic and how much time we're spending alone. And I think some people were thinking, well, this is just going to blow over, or like somebody else will take care of it, or, it's not going to last. But it's like, hey, it might be too late if you sit around and say somebody else is going to do it. You best believe Trump is paying attention to those marches and protests, and so are the lawmakers, and they're noticing, and it does matter. So, I hope that this is a time when people can get out there and use your voice, because there's not going to be anything left,
That's right.
if you don't, and it's not just going to blow over. And you do have an important voice, regardless of your background or socioeconomic status, etc. You have a voice, and let's use it.
Absolutely. And I think for old people, it's kind of fun to come back to how daring they were 80 years ago or 60
Yeah.
years ago when they were fighting in the trenches
Yeah.
and like, oh, come alive again. You can only live so long on cake. You know what I mean? At some point, you have to get to real food, things that really nurture us, and get out of this haze that we've gotten into with thinking that money is the purpose of life, but that actually being happy, having our needs met, supporting one another, helping the earth, Those are the things that are important in life. And taking care of our children and our animals.
Amen. Even the ones that bark during all your podcast recordings.
Absolutely. Mine did work. I don't know why.
Well, you got lucky. Well, Beth, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know that you spend a lot of time in pain and not well, and so these interviews are not easy for you. So I really appreciate you taking the time to show up and have this conversation with me.
Are you kidding? You're giving me an opportunity to use the one thing I have, which is my voice. So
Well,
you've done me a favor, believe me. And I
well,
want to use my voice, and I want to connect to people, and I'm not ready to go.
Well, having said that, you know, for anybody listening to this podcast, if you would like to have Beth on your podcast, hit us up. You know, I'll get you connected. And we want to spread Beth's word more and get her into some more spaces and on podcasts and all of those things. So if you'd like to have another conversation with Beth, hit us up. I'm going to make sure that all your links are in the show notes, and the new Declaration of Independence. Everything will be there so people will be able to get connected with you. And yeah, let's get Beth out there. I mean, not many people have the resume and the experience that you have, and I think we should lean on your information and experience and knowledge and to guide the future, right?
Guided by the future, and that's what I want to still believe, that I have a future.
I love that.
Bless you, Molly.
Thank you. Thank you. Right back at you. Thank you so much.
Can't wait to meet your audience.
That's right. That's right. I have a feeling they're going to have some feedback for you.
Let me know.
I'm sure you won't be shy to that. But thank you for tuning in to What Do We Do Next? I hope you are finding these conversations valuable. I hope you can pull a gem or two from them to help you have better conversations in your life. And to just remember that at the end of the day, we all just want to be loved. We just want to be a part of something good. I don't think anybody out there wants to rip babies from their mother's arms. I don't think what's happening is a true reflection. And so, be good to each other, and be kind to yourself, just like you said, Beth. And until next time, take care of yourself, and we'll see you on the next one.